Oh my gosh. Actually, I don't need that because I'm all mic'd up, so now you can see me. That's quite an introduction, Anja. Thank you so much. I hardly recognise myself in that, but I'm very honoured and so happy to be here and to see all of you in the audience today. I started off life as a preschool teacher, my professional life as a preschool teacher. So it's wonderful to look around the room tonight and see so many families and little ones. We've got little ones here. Hi, everyone. And I know we've got some who are kind of in the adolescent years. And I heard a story from this young person up here telling me he's brought his mum along today so he can help his mum understand more about his digital gaming. And I love that. I've got a little wave up the back there. Oh, here's your phone back too. Thank you. So, so it's great. It's lovely to be here. We've had such a good couple of days. I've loved talking to lots of different teachers and educators and families. And so tonight I'm going to share a little bit about some of the research that has been happening within the, as Anja mentioned, the Australian Research Council Centre of Excellence for the Digital Child. A very long name, we just call it the Digital Child Centre usually. And that's a centre with about 200 researchers in it across 6 Australian universities, and we have 14 international universities and different partners, like UNICEF is one of our partners. So we work together and we work very collaboratively. In fact, we've got some colleagues in the room here from New York, NYU. They're sitting there in a group. And we've been doing some research together. So we're a centre that, even though we're kind of stuck at the end of the world, in a way, in Australia, way down south, we make sure that we reach out across all of the world. And it's so special, so wonderful to be here tonight and to continue some of these conversations and, I hope, broaden them and build on what we've been doing so far. So I wanted to start tonight with two conversations. The first was a grandmother that I just happened to meet one day accidentally through a friend, and my friend introduced me to her as, oh, she has this digital child centre. And immediately this grandmother launched into this story about how she had a 15-year-old grandson and she hadn't seen him for months. And she said, digital technology, his gaming has ruined my life. We don't have a relationship anymore. And I said, oh, tell me more about that. And she said, well, I don't let him bring his phone or his iPad to my house because I think when he comes to visit me, he needs to focus on me and family. And I said, well, what if he brings it and he can show you what he likes to do? No, I have my rules and I'm not going to let that happen. So it was tragic to hear this story of this broken relationship within this family. And that really stuck with me, that story. The second was a story, I travel a lot for work, and I was on a flight to Melbourne, and the flight attendant saw me writing, doing some work on the plane, and she said, what are you doing? And I told her. And she said, oh, I've got a 15-year-old son. She said, I'm really worried about him. And I said, why? Well, he's on his iPad all the time, he's gaming all the time, and he's in his room and he's by himself. And I said, oh, tell me more about that, because I'm always curious. I think being curious is part of being a researcher. I said, tell me more. And he was like, well, I said, is he online? Yes, he's online. I said, is he online with others? Oh, yes, he's got his friends from school he's online with. I said, oh, that's fantastic. I said, what does he do? Oh, they've got these games. And she said, I can hear them talking all the time. And I said, so it sounds like he's really social online. And she said, yes, he is. And I said, so that's a good thing. And she said, I guess it is. And then she said, I've just realized talking to you that I think the happiest time of his day is in the evening when he can sit and play games with his friends online. She said, you just changed my view of what he's doing. So I think great conversations are wonderful ways to find out what's happening and to be able to talk about ideas. And so that's what makes me so excited about tonight, because we will have a Q&A session and we will have time for good questions and good conversations as well. So I'm going to start by also talking about the first years of life, early years. So even though we have some members in the audience who are in that first 8 years, we have many more who are not, including many of the adults here in the room. But these first 8 years of life are really important. They're the foundation years of development. And a lot of the research centres have started with children aged from school years up. But we have not. We have started from birth. Birth to 8 is our focus. And the reason for that is we think they're the foundation years. And it's actually worked very much in our favour because a lot of the centres, for instance, working with the Australian government, are centres with adolescents and older. But the Australian government likes to talk with us because they say, you are the only centre that's actually focusing on these very young years, and we need to hear from you as well. So that focus is really important. We didn't realise that at the time. But the other thing is children now, as we know, even before birth, they are leaving digital footprints. You go and have an ultrasound. There's evidence, parents are putting up things on time. There's sharing of images on screens from very, very young ages, before babies and infants and young people even have a chance to even consent or know what's happening. So one of the important things I think things that our centre does are things like ensuring that we push forward children's rights. And one of the children's rights that I think is really important is the right to be forgotten. So that children at some point can look back and say, I don't want that. I don't want that life, my history. I mean, I think back to my own childhood. I'd be mortified if some of that was ever put on social media. And so this work is really important, not just in terms of doing research, but in terms of advocating for what's in the best interests of children. And one of them is the right to be forgotten online. So tonight we're here to hear a little bit more about some of the research, as we were saying, and to realise that the digital world is risk and opportunity. Now, lots of times people talk about the risk, but they forget about the opportunities. And one of our members in the centre, he wrote this wonderful story about digital technologies are like going to the beach. So when you go to the beach, you get prepared for it. You put sunscreen on, you swim between the flags. In Australia, you always swim between the flags because there's lots of sharks out there. Yes, and then you might fall over, you might get dumped by a wave, but they're all risks. But you kind of manage those risks, and digital technologies are a bit like that. So there are risks, like. And we know around some of the things around privacy, for instance, and being safe online, but there's also so many opportunities. So let's focus on how we balance the risk and make the most of the opportunities. So in Australia, these are the kinds of questions that families are asking. How can technology support my child to learn? How do I know good from bad technology? How much technology is safe? And how do I keep my child safe online? So since we were established 4 years ago, these questions have become even more important. But we have new questions now that we didn't even imagine at the time. What is AI? What about social media and my child's digital well-being? Is banning smartphones a good thing? And how do we support our children to be digital citizens? So in our centre, with our over 200 researchers, these are the kinds of questions that we are researching, and then working out ways. The next part of the work of our centre is to see how can we best translate these into policy, into good practices in classrooms, and to help build awareness of how to engage with children. So tonight, I'm basically talking about those 5 things. I'm going to talk a little bit about the myths. I'm going to talk about family engagement and interaction, children in classrooms, how to keep your child safe online, and then finally, some of the work that we're doing around children's participation in research, because we like listening to children. because children, as Angie was saying before, they have a different perspective on things to adults. So we want to hear from them. So we'll start with some myths. And there's 3 myths I really want to talk about. Now, here they come. So Bruno Bettelheim, he wrote a lot about myths. And he talked about myths by their very nature being pessimistic. He said the power of myths is that it offers models of human behaviour and it gives meaning and value to life. But he also says they're pessimistic, unlike a fairy tale, which is optimistic. Now, as cultures, we've always been myth makers. It's what we do around all of the different important parts of our lives, and digital technologies really is no different. So myths also, though, can be moral panics, where there is an intense amount of concern about what is perceived as a threat, for in this case, for the digital child. So we're going to take a deep dive into these 3 different myths. The first myth is that children are on their devices all the time, that they don't participate in other activities, they don't play outside, and that this causes health and social problems. Now, this author has really pushed this particular myth. And I know that many of the people here in the audience have read this book or know about this book. And I want to say a few things about this book because it has created a whole lot of concern for many parents and for educators too. So one of the things that we talk about in education is how valuable play is. And he agrees with that in the book. So there are some things I agree with him and some things I disagree with him. So play is great, but he really devalues digital play. He sees that as something that is wrong, that is not childhood. But childhoods, of course, are contemporary. The childhoods that we all grew up in are different to the childhoods of today. So, of course, things are going to be different. And, of course, things are going to change. But the reality is that there is no longer this distinction between the analogue and the digital for young children. It's just their world. So he also talks about banning phones. Says they're the most terrible thing. Now, the problem when you ban phones is they go underground. I know of someone who has 2 phones he takes to school. One he hands in to the teacher, one he puts in his sock. I know another child who within 10 minutes broke the box, worked out how to unlock the box so he could take his phone out, lock the box, put it in his bag at school, end of the day, put it back in the box and give it back to out the door. So when things go underground, children have no space to go when things go wrong. So it can end up to be an even more dangerous world for children where they don't have that feeling that they can go and talk to people because they think they've done something that they shouldn't have done. James Norman, he's at the Dublin City University Anti-Bullying Centre. He's done a lot of work with children and young people around phones. And he says that young people are much more nuanced in their comments than we are. They can understand all the complexities of phone use. And he says they want to be consulted. Young people want to be consulted about these matters, not just be told this is what you do. The other important part about social media and phones in this instance is, for many young people, that's where they find their friends. That's where they find their peer group. So when you take away the social media or the phones, you're taking away their social networks. And for some people, particularly in Australia, in regional and rural communities, where do they go? Where do they go for their peer groups, which is such an essential part of growing up? I'm going to now show you a slide where you don't have to have any technology in your day to be able to have a perfect day. Now here, we ask children to describe a perfect day. And this little girl said, well, I've got some cats and dogs, and my grandma has cats and dogs, and they fight all the time. So a perfect day for me would be when I could get them together and they would be happy and play together all day. So there's no mention of technology in that. Her perfect day doesn't even count that. So, you know, it's a myth that digital is everywhere all the time. Again, children have opportunities to be able to find spaces outside that. The second myth is around technology is responsible for children's lack of social skills. And you kind of heard some of that in those first two conversations I talked about this morning. So what I'm going to do is actually show you a snippet from a program, 60 Minutes program in Australia. It's just 1 minute, and it's the start of it. And it really builds into these fears about technology and the damage it does to children. So we'll play it first, and then we'll have a look at it.
It's hard to remember life before smartphones and tablets, and with Wi-Fi and 4G, it means the internet is everywhere. Technology is completely embedded in our work and play and has become the essential part of our lives. But you can have too much of a good thing. Internet addiction disorder is now a genuine psychological illness. It's ruining lives and even changing the way our brains process information. Worse still, experts are seeing dangerous signs in toddlers. It's a familiar sight in households around the world. Children being entertained and placated by technology. But this is also familiar. Monumental meltdowns when the devices are taken away.
Okay, so those of you who may know 2-year-olds, that's kind of common, isn't it? That we all have experienced the terrible twos and going through those kinds of wanting things. It often happens in shops and places in a public space, and you go, oh no. But it happens because that's part of the development of young children. So to blame that on digital technologies is a really unfair and frankly, you know, completely inappropriate way to blame it. And this idea about screen addiction, I'm sorry, I just don't buy into that. There's somebody in Australia who's making a lot of money right now telling children that they are addicted to the screen. I've seen a documentary on it, and it's just so sad. These little kids go, I know I'm addicted to technology, and I'm really learning how not to, you know, to get better. And I'm thinking, they're 7 years old, for goodness sakes. Are they really addicted? Come on, let's think about what they're doing with technology, and let's find other ways. Let's talk about some of those actions and ways that we can support children without giving it a medical kind of terminology. Now, the next clip I'm going to show you is actually an ad again. It's from Optus, a telecom company. It was played during COVID when you were all locked up in homes. And it shows you the opposite of technology being isolated. Now, remember, it is an ad, but I think it's a really lovely ad that shows how young people, children can come together and do all sorts of crazy things with play and digital technologies.
So in the kitchen there can be a massive loop that
Okay, so there's the opposite way that we can think about digital technology. In these playful ways, we have interconnected communities, we have peer interactions, all focusing with the goal in the mind there. So let's move on now to our third myth, which is about loss of connection because of this. Now, a lot of the guidelines, the Australian guidelines, have health guidelines, and they say things like there's no technology before 2 years of age. And then there's the education guidelines that says we don't talk about age. We don't talk about how much time. We talk about what are children actually doing with digital technologies and who are they doing that with? Are they doing that with their parents, their friends? And as you saw there, you know, there's peers, there's siblings, which all of the members of the communities in which you're part of. So what we want to do in the centre is we shift. We're not talking about screen time anymore. We're talking about screen use, because we think just measuring how much time is a fairly senseless kind of measurement, but we want to look at what are they actually doing and who are they doing that with, because relationships are at the core of all that we do and be as humans. So let's have a look at this example. Now this was Messenger Kids, a free app launched in 2017, but it was really popular during COVID. So here is Molly, who's actually texting. Actually, it's my niece, I have to confess, it's my niece. And she was texting me during COVID, and she was wanting to reach out to me, and you can see how I reached back to her. And in fact, I put this one in today because on Sunday when I arrived, she sent me just a picture of a pair of Converse shoes. Again, and I wrote back and she said, "Oh, do you like my new shoes?" And so, because she knew I was away. So we have this lovely relationship. We don't see each other that often, but this is how we keep in touch. We don't talk on the phone, but we do keep in touch through this kind of mechanism. And here, this is a dad, and he had a 3-year-old daughter and a 4-year-old son. And you can see that he has quite a lot of games there on his phone. The apps range from Old Mac, and then there's Makeup for Girls, to Jigsaw Puzzles, to Angry Birds, Star Wars, to Google Earth, to Star Tracker. So I love that this dad had these kind of images on his phone that the children would use at various times. And then I know we have some grandmothers in the room. And here is grandma is on screen, and you can see her granddaughter there. They play cards together. So grandma lives quite a long way away. On a regular basis, they play cards together. They even cook together. So grandma cooks online with their granddaughter. And this is a really special moment when they do this. And this is how relationships can be constructed through those digital moments. And they're often so fleeting, so mundane, that you kind of forget about them. You forget that they even exist. But this is how technology can play a really big role in family relationships. And yet we often overlook that particular significance. So what we're talking about here when we're talking about relationships is around participation frameworks. Participation frameworks are bringing people together to participate in some kind of group and social moments together. And I often say to people, did you play Monopoly as a kid with your family? Or did you play cards together? Are you still doing that kind of thing? That's great if you're still doing that kind of thing. And you can also do it with digital technologies as well. When I talk to parents, a lot of people tell me straight away that they're very good at surveilling their children. They're very good at turning off the switch when the kids have had enough on screen time or whatever. And I say to them, but do you play with them? Do you sit down and play with them? Because that is at the heart of relationships. And whether you play online, whether you play kick a football around, whether you play cards, it doesn't matter. It's that act of being together and building up that social knowledge of each other, but social knowledge of the kinds of activities that you do. So the Australian Office of E-Safety recommends that children play digital activities with their children rather than just ask them about what they're doing online. By playing together, they say you can understand what children are doing online. You can understand and be able to talk knowledgeably about the children and about aspects of that game. I think kids sometimes don't want to bother talking to their parents about it because they think their parents won't understand. But if you make it your business to understand, then that opens up those ways of having conversation. And then those conversation openers can lead to other kinds of conversation openers as well. Okay, so here we have two siblings. They're playing Minecraft. They each have their own iPad. They're monitoring each other's actions. They're calling out to manage the shared agendas of the collecting the treasure and fighting zombies. There are no parents present, and nor were there calls for help. So here you can see that John's instructions made visible to Ella to destroy the online zombies. He told her the new action of tapping on the screen. He told her where, head down to me, and he monitored his actions, and he did the same. So they both worked on individual screens to tackle the shared task. And at the end, they claimed the potato and the gold resources. So when you look at this, what kind of mental models can we make? One mental model is that John and Ella are engaged in collaboration and problem solving in this shared quest. And that's part of the necessary skills of life. And here, these activities of learning how to problem solve, to work together, experienced through this joyful digital activity. Now, the next one I'm going to show you is actually a family. And they're about to go on vacation. And they're about to go visit Melbourne and visit Pentridge Jail, which is now no longer a jail, but a tourist place that you can go visit. So Mum starts asking about, I wonder if anybody escaped from this jail when it was working. So they go on and they look at all the different ways people escaped and for how long they were able to escape before they got caught. But again, what mental models do we make of this family talk? Is it all a bit chaotic? Maybe you think that technology shouldn't even be used at the dinner table, but this is a real-life example of what actually happens in families. And here we have a real-life example of a web search that was relevant for this family, that the children were then engaged in a strategy to ask a query. So when you ask queries, that's a really important skill you need to be able to web search effectively. And then they discuss the results of this search. So here's another really good example of how families can come together and in everyday ways, part of the conversations, use technology as a resource and not as an end in its own self. So the important message I want you to take away from this is that it's not about what is the impact on technology, but what is the complex of relationships brought about that is important for understanding both children themselves and the technological forms. I'll leave you to think about that one, and we'll skip on to the next. So here we're going to start looking at some learning experiences. So we're moving from the home context now into the education context. And I'm going to start with this, in this preschool, there's a bunch of preschool children and they're in the playground, and they've got rocks in their hand, and that's their mobile phones. So this is about pretend play, and then the teacher comes in and she starts an interaction. So there, it's hard to hear all of the conversation, but you get the gist of it. A girl is texting, will you come out with me? The teacher, so the girl is in this pretend play mode. The teacher comes in with the real frame and says, well, really, can you do that? You're not allowed to do texting and driving at the same time, and so on. So I think it's a really interesting example of play, and also how teachers can interact in a way. I mean, the teacher had two choices. She could have joined in pretend mode as well, but in this instance, she chose to join in a reality kind of way. And that's a discussion we can have about pedagogy and things like that another day. But I think it was really interesting just watching those kids, how they bring their everyday moments into the pretense. And did we skip a slide? Yes, we skipped a slide here. So pretend play is what children do every day. It's part of how they imagine the world. It's also part of how they prepare for and practice everyday social life. So every child should be engaged in pretend play. It's an important part of what we're doing. So that's part of the key message, and you'll see digital technologies as part of that pretend play. Now, the next place I'm taking you is into a classroom that involves hairy caterpillars. Now, on one of the first days of kindergarten, there was a lot of hairy caterpillars on a tree that had fallen onto the footpath outside the kindergarten. So some of the children had touched them, and they came in with itchy bites all over them, and it created quite a discussion in the classroom. Now, this topic became a conversation all throughout the entire year. And it created an opportunity for the teacher, building on the children's own interests, about the curriculum areas of nature and sustainability. So I'm just going to show you some of the activities that involved the digital and also this interest around the itchy grub. So here you can see some activities. They produced a book about caterpillars. Some of these were digital, some of these were paper activities. They did a catalogue search for ordering the life cycle of a caterpillar. They looked for more photos of caterpillars online, and they asked, how can we find out more? Then they came up with the idea, let's write an email to the museum, because they wanted to know more about the caterpillar. So they did that, and the museum wrote back and gave them lots of information. Then they kept going. They made a list of what they wanted to know about how to build a garden for the butterflies. Now, they found out from the museum that this was a fairly rare kind of caterpillar, that it used to be local in the area, but with all the urbanisation, that it had lost its bushes that it grew on, that it needed. So they found out what they needed to know. They involved the parents. The parents came in and had a working bee, and they put these bushes all along the back fence, based on the knowledge they'd found out. Then they called that the Wonder Garden. Then they wrote a sign as well to say, don't touch these caterpillars because you'll get itchy. And then they went into the Wonder Garden with their digital cameras, and they took photos of the cocoons that were now starting to appear. So this is a wonderful example of how something happened in a classroom, and then how the teacher very effectively used play and the digital to find out more, to use it as a resource. So this again is a participation framework. This time it's around children and teachers, and it's around how the teachers structure some of the children's interests and activities, and how they also shaped possibilities for learning. And here you can just see a really quick snapshot of all the different resources that they used. They took photos, they hopped onto YouTube, they used their laptop, and so on, over the entire course of the year. So rather than treating technology as this thing you add on to the curriculum and make it separate to the everyday of the classroom, what I'm suggesting is you use it within those activities to enhance and build sustained educational projects. Now, you're going to hear from a teacher now. This is a Year 1 teacher. And I asked her about what she was doing with the digital in the classroom. So we're going to skip on now into keeping your children safe online. But first, we're going, with this, one of the things I want to say about online experiences is that it's a public good that's really worth investing in, financially, through government schemes, but also through regulatory mechanisms, and also like classification systems. And I know some people are over here are actually working on classification systems around how you can look at what is good quality apps and materials and resources within this space. So these are the kinds of resources that are going to benefit all of us. So looking forward to seeing how that moves along. But here I also want to now show you an ad. We're going to be seduced a little bit by some of the fantastic moments that Google can provide for us.
Okay, Google, play music in all rooms.
Okay, Google, how many stars are in our galaxy?
Well, there are about 100 to 400 billion stars, according to space.com.
Which star is the closest?
According to NASA, the nearest star system is Alpha Centauri.
Can you show me what it looks like on the TV?
So big tech companies are everywhere, and they really are infiltrating into the home and into education settings. And kids every day learn from these kinds of platforms. But these platforms also have dangers that can be hidden. And some of the research that's coming out of Australia by the Australian Office of the Australian Information Commissioner says that about 50% of parents feel less in control of their children's online safety. They don't know how to protect children's personal information, and they don't feel in control of that. So this is really a very major issue. There's a recent Australian news story about a mother whose child started school, and the school sent home this form to ask the mother to sign 20 consent. There were 20 platforms that school used, and they asked the mother to give her approval for her child to be able to access all 20 of them. So she had to give the formal consent for that to happen. Now, when they looked at that, when the news story looked at it, they found out that there are over 200 pages of legalese that she would have had to have signed for those 20 platforms to be used. So really what we've got to do here is work with these tech companies to be able to make sure that these consent guidelines are manageable. So this is where we all need a voice. We need to be kind of pushing forward, working as researchers. We're working with EdTech and other platforms to try and bring these on board. We've got some who are very responsible and very eager to work with us, and there are a few rogues out there as well. But I think we're kind of pushing in the right direction. So what we want to do is have better internets for children. So we talk about children's television. Let's start talking about children's internet. And we need to be thinking about how do we do that. So what we want is the creation of safe, educational, and enjoyable children's internet experiences that starts with taking on board seriously children's needs and what they want. It's not with banning. Banning is not going to help that. It kind of starts a conversation that distracts you from the real work of saying to these platforms, you've got to stand up. You've got to provide content for children. So banning it just gives them, when you ban it, they get the tick. They don't have to do anything. They're like, and if anybody's watching something, they say, well, they're not supposed to because, you know, it's banned. So we have to make them accountable for this. So that's why I think we need to stand up and push back against knee-jerk reactions around banning things. We also need to call out for quality standards for age-appropriate entertainment and educational products and services. So schools have an important role to do that. A lot of the time, schools themselves aren't quite sure what products they should be engaging with. So that's, again, where we need to have some really good standards about what creates high quality and how do we know it when we see it. And this is where we work with governments, industry, educators and researchers to develop some public consensus. And you're part of that public consensus, you and your children, about how do we do this. And then we want these standards to be endorsed by governments and widely implemented by tech companies, with particularly ensuring that they're transparent and that they are accountable for what they say. So I've got just a few little points here about helping your child online, and I'm sure that this may come up in conversation later. You know, it's around, we talked a little bit about this before, go online with your child. Do things together. Be a good online model. If you're there scrolling, doing doomsday scrolling, well, you're setting a model of behaviour that makes it okay. So I was called out by my 10-year-old daughter once. Mum, you are doing what you told me not to do. And she was right. So we have to really model really good behaviours. Actually, she called me out more than once, I have to say. But anyway. And also, we've got to talk about what is good and bad online content with children. We also have to talk about a behaviour of etiquette, because you have to say, what you can say to a person should be, and what you say online should be what you would feel comfortable saying to a person. And these are conversations that start at home. So like, really, is that something you really would say to your friend who's beside you? So these are the kinds of conversations, and these make a real difference. Now, also, as part of this, is also about being a good digital citizen. And we've got some research happening in the centre around this. Because digital citizens need a few things. They need three things. They need to be focused on e-safety. So this is about ensuring that we have support to stop online harm, privacy issues, and security issues. We need to have digital literacy. So we need to have the knowledge and skills to use hardware and software, and a knowledge of how to apply digital technologies and resources for a purpose. And we need, thirdly, media literacy. We need media literacy so we can be critically reflective of it, and we can use it in creative ways, so that we are creators, not only consumers of digital media. Children need to have opportunities to express themselves and to be able to communicate ideas and understand about the insights into the digital media in society. So to help with this is one of the studies we did in the centre. We worked with a teacher to design a curriculum activity, and she wanted to work with the children about helping them understand how to give consent for sharing photographs. Because in this childcare, the photographs were taken, they were put up onto a platform, and parents could access them. So the teacher thought it was important that the children be able to understand which images of themselves they wanted shared with their parents. So when the teacher talked to the children, one of the children said, oh, we don't want the bad strangers to get our photos. And somebody else talked about the hackers and said they could get the photographs and that would be bad. And so they're having these kind of ideas about who and why you wouldn't want that. And then from that day onwards, she said, her children's perspectives changed in their classroom. They were being much more direct about what photos they wanted shared with their parents. And they said, no, I don't want that one, but yes, that one can go up. So here from the very earliest ages, they were learning how to be a digital citizen where they had choice and agency in what they approved about their own actions in their own particular worlds. So it's about getting the balance right. It's about getting the balance right between digital activity and doing other things, but it's also about getting the balance right through a series of books that we've worked in our centre on. So these are authored by children. The children, we had a national competition. We chose 4 authors. They worked with the publishers, a publisher and author, and this is about, each of these books tells a story about getting the balance right. And there's a QR code there. You can actually download those stories off our internet, and you can look at them. And we've got a second round that actually is underway this year. So good place to actually go. Now, children's participation in research. So we know it's important. We know it's important that children participate. We want to hear their voices. And we've got some research projects where that's been actually happening as we go forward. One of them is around asking children about what they think. These are, this one here is about, the question they were asked is, imagine some technology of the future that you would like. And this is one person's story. He said, you've got some photos. Oh no, sorry, first one here. They were asked about, draw something about digital technology at home. And you can see there's mum there looking rather cross. And then there's the little guy on the iPad. And mum is saying, time to stop. And she's looking rather cross. And then you can imagine the tension here. We have these tensions that happen when these kind of things happen in family life. So time is up. And when the child's play has come to an end, sometimes without any warning. So that's a fairly strong image I think many of us might actually reflect on from an adult perspective, but also from a child's perspective. This one was when he was imagining the future. And on the left-hand side, he says, I'd like to have a teleporting machine to take me to my friends. They live 2 miles away. The second drawing says, I have a money machine in the future to have all the money in the world. The machine will have an inbuilt teleporting ability to bring the money to me. And then in the third drawing, he says, I'm rich, I've got a laptop. So we love to hear what they're saying because that helps us imagine and understand how they think. This is another one. We asked the children, we said, if you left you took your friend's book home, what would you do to tell them that you have his book? And they came up with these ideas. Well, I could walk it across the road, I could ask my mum to call, I could ask his parents, and so on. So the world is neither digital nor analog. It is a series of actions and activities that weave across because children don't think like, am I doing digital? Am I doing real life? They're just doing life. And these kinds of resources, oh, this is the last one. What do you think we should ask? What should researchers ask? They should talk about their friends and how they use technologies, what kind of things they like to do. So that gives us some ideas. And it's rather good because we're actually doing that kind of research now, so that's a good thing. Now, and we're putting that into the early years new standards so that children's voices will be heard in the revised issue. Now, onto the RITEC project. Okay, so what we see here, studying the video itself is fantastic because it shows us how these players shared strategies and they collaboratively participated. They oriented to the shared goal of winning. The novice player was guided by the more experienced player, and there was some shared laughter in this as well. So there was looking at how collaboration happens within these kinds of games. But we also did more. We also looked at their psychophysiological data because they're all hooked up. We had eye gaze and other measurements. And we looked for moisture spikes, like when they crashed the car, when they were being told 1 minute to finish the game, their spikes went up. And we did more than that, though. We did what we think is the first in the world. We actually asked them to look at their own data and to talk about, well, is that really what you think happened? Or is that a researcher interpretation? Or is it an AI machine interpretation? Okay, I'll stop it there. But what you could see when we looked at that in fine detail, it was just a kind of bit to show you, and I know it's complicated, but there were 2 times when you could see that the physical body reacted to when the car crashed and also when they were told they had 1 minute to actually finish. But then we showed that data to the children, and then we asked them, this was using the wellbeing framework that was being developed within this project. And we asked them about, did they know the game before? Did they know this game before? What did you think about it? And did you get to make decisions about playing with the game? And this is one of the children's responses to that. He says, it's like the ball is like on the field. Do you go to where the ball is now or where the ball is going to be? And then at the start, I probably was like chasing the ball, but closer to the end, I was trying to predict where the ball was, what the ball was going to be, and going from there. So this is important because we had things where we said to children, look, we think that you look really disappointed there because you lost the goal. And they go, no, I wasn't disappointed. It was the first time that yes, I had lost the goal, but I learned a new strategy, and I was thinking about that. So it really kind of challenges the analyst's opinion very often, or the analyst's view, to say, let's look at how the children and young people themselves are actually seeing what's actually going on here. So basically, to sum up this part of it very quickly, is that technology can support learning and relationships, and we can really use digital technology to really support these outcomes as we go forward. And I'm going to just finish up with the last slide around how do we go forward from here. Well, the first is to debunk some of these myths that we have, that we've talked about through the entire session today. The second is, how do we reinvest in better ways in learning? And one way is to focus on digital learning communities. We can't just keep throwing material at schools. We have to think about ways that we can provide access for digital learning that is embracing informal learning as well as how we engage with these digital resources. But of course, this requires funding and it requires knowledge. So this is the kind of work that the Centre is doing as we go forward. And I'm going to finish with saying, people think they have to protect children from the digital world. What we need to do is do less about protecting children from the digital world because they're already living within the digital world. So we need to look at how best to make the opportunities for them living within the digital world. Now, if you want to know more about the Centre and some of our resources, if you go to www.digitalchild.org.au, you'll find lots of our materials there. So anything I've kind of glossed over, we can certainly pick up in the conversations.